Winter approached, though the southern lands remained temperate. They could not forget the north, home to the Starks, rumored to be stoic and unyielding. Yet the north was distant, and winter's snows would slow any movement in that direction. For now, Drogo aimed to cripple the heart of the realm, King's Landing. Some suggested attacking the capital from the sea, but the Dothraki's disdain for water remained strong. Instead, they would surge across the interior, capturing or bypassing fortresses that refused to yield. The march northward from Highgarden tested their endurance, for the lords of the Stormlands, or perhaps those loyal to the crown, harassed them. But it was all small scale, none of it enough to halt the unstoppable tide. Along the way, Daenerys encountered small folk who knelt in terror and pleaded for mercy. She saw the ravages of war, the burned farms, the weeping widows. There were moments she felt guilt claw at her, but she hardened herself, recalling the cruelty of her brother Viserys and of all those who had mocked her in her youth. She vowed to use this power for a purpose that would, in the end, restore stability. The Dothraki, for their part, lived in the moment, reveling in the plunder and the glory of each conquest. Khal Drogo continued to demonstrate that he was as adept at leadership as he was at personal combat. He doled out spoils strategically, rewarded loyalty with gold, and crushed dissent with lethal ruthlessness. By the time they drew near King's Landing, the city's walls bristled with defenders. The city had rarely faced a threat of this nature, an immense cavalry horde well-versed in raiding and open-field battles, but less experienced in siegecraft. King's Landing was protected by the Blackwater Bay on one side and thick walls on the other. The Dothraki had neither siege towers nor war machines. Yet the unstoppable force of their numbers, combined with the cunning counsel of Daenerys, might still prevail. She had spent her time learning from those who once served her father, gleaning what weaknesses might exist. Smugglers and certain unscrupulous merchants could be bribed or intimidated into opening hidden gates along the walls. There were rumors of secret tunnels leading into the city. The city guard might be ripe for desertion if properly motivated. Not to mention, disease and hunger might sweep through the city if it were cut off from supply lines for too long. So Khal Drogo encircled King's Landing, or as best as one can encircle a city abutting a large bay. He allowed no major roads to remain unguarded, no farmland unburned outside the walls. He did, however, leave open certain paths, traps for refugees and supplies, waiting to ambush anyone attempting to reach the city. The Crown's defenders attempted frequent sallies, hoping to break the blockade. On several occasions, pitched battles erupted outside the city gates, with knights charging forth to drive away the Dothraki outriders. Each time, the defenders inflicted casualties, but at a terrible cost. The Dothraki were masters of open-field maneuvers, and the savage swirl of horse-mounted combat always tipped in their favor eventually. Gradually, King's Landing began to starve. Tension rose within the walls, as rumors circulated about the unstoppable horde waiting to tear the city apart. Daenerys, from her vantage point in a makeshift war camp, wondered if she was truly prepared for what might happen once the city fell. The last time King's Landing witnessed a Targaryen reclaiming it was, in truth, never. The Targaryens had lost it to Robert's rebellion, and none had come close to retaking it since. Now she stood on the precipice of fulfilling her dream, but at the cost of thousands of lives. She thought of Aegon the Conqueror, who took Westeros with dragons. She had no dragons, only the Dothraki. Would history judge her any differently? Within the city, discontent simmered. If the king ruling from the Red Keep, let us call him the occupant on the throne, was wise, he would try to rally more allies. But the realm was in disarray. The Reach had been compromised. The Westerlands might have mustered an army, but the question was whether it could break the siege in time. The Riverlands were uneasy, battered by smaller Dothraki incursions. The North watched warily, potentially massing its own host but wary of traveling so far south in uncertain weather. The Vale remained aloof, hidden behind the formidable mountains of the moon. King's Landing, once the seat of power, now seemed like a fortress on the brink of collapse. And so, one fateful dawn, Khal Drogo ordered the final push. Word had reached them that a large allied force was nearing from the west, hoping to lift the siege. He would not allow the city time to be saved. He commanded every blood rider, every warrior, to prepare for an assault. Dothraki infantry was almost non-existent, so their approach to a siege was unconventional. They used captured locals to build makeshift ladders, battered down gates using rams with thick hides stretched over them to protect from boiling oil. They threatened to torture and kill any captive who faltered in their tasks. At the same time, bribes and whispered promises spread among the city guard, urging them to open a gate or sabotage the defenses. At first light, the assault began. The defenders loosed arrows and poured oil from the battlements, igniting some of the rams in flames. Screams filled the air. The Dothraki archers replied in kind, launching volley after volley, picking off defenders who leaned too far over the ramparts. At several points, the ladders were raised. Dothraki riders dismounted and scrambled up, fearless in their desire for the kill. The city guard, though brave, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of these invaders. The clang of steel on steel, the roar of war cries, echoed across the city walls. Slowly, cracks began to show in the defense. In the middle of this, a sudden cry arose near the king's gate. Figures rushed to and fro on the ramparts. Confusion and panic erupted. One of the city's gates began to open from within, as if saboteurs had unlatched the locks. The Dothraki seized the opportunity, surging forward on horseback, trampling defenders who stood in their way. Men shouted orders, knights tried to rally, but the chaos was too great. Soon, the gate was fully compromised, and the horde poured into the city, unstoppable as a flash flood. Within minutes, the streets turned into a massacre. Civilians screamed and fled. Knights and soldiers tried to form defensive lines in narrow alleyways, but the Dothraki excelled at swift, brutal urban fighting once they smelled blood. Khal Drogo himself led a spearhead toward the Red Keep. Daenerys followed, her heart pounding. She recalled her father's final moments, the way he was deposed and killed by the Kingslayer. She remembered the stories of how the rebels had burst into the city. Now she was the invader. The irony was not lost on her. She pressed forward, not letting sentimentality cloud her resolve. She was so close to her goal, a single step away from reclaiming the legacy of House Targaryen. Fighting in the streets was fierce. The king's personal guard, whether they were gold cloaks or some version of the King's Guard, fought valiantly. But the Dothraki wave was unstoppable. The Red Keep's gates offered one last stand. Archers above the battlements shot arrows until they ran out. Oil was poured over intruders, but the Dothraki battered down the great doors and forced their way in. Hall by hall, corridor by corridor, the palace defenders were cut down. Finally, Khal Drogo stood in the throne room of the Red Keep, spattered in blood. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end. Its occupant, if still present, made a final, desperate stand. However it ended, the result was inevitable. The Targaryen queen and her Khal claimed the seat of power by right of conquest. The aftermath was both triumphant and terrifying. The city had been taken. Smoke rose from several districts where fires raged uncontrolled. Looting and violence still racked some neighborhoods, though Daenerys pleaded with Drogo to restrain his men, to keep them from doing unnecessary harm, if only to preserve the city from utter ruin. Drogo's fiercest blood riders questioned why they shouldn't ravage the city as spoils, but the Khal decreed that the city, for the sake of his Khaleesi, should remain standing. Though the Dothraki roamed the streets, carting off valuables, and though many outrages were committed, it was not the complete destruction some had feared. In the Red Keep, Daenerys Targaryen at last placed her hand upon the Iron Throne. She felt a rush of emotion. Vindication, sorrow, fear, and exhilaration, all at once. In the weeks that followed, she struggled to impose order. She commanded that the city's elders, guild leaders, and any lords who had survived come forth to swear fealty. Some did so reluctantly, others with more cunning. She declared herself queen of the 7 kingdoms, though it remained to be seen how many would accept her rule. Khal Drogo cared little for titles, but he loved the fear and respect emanating from all corners. The Dothraki took up residences in the city's outskirts, stabling their horses in open squares. Westerosi courtiers who dared remain found the presence of so many savage warriors disconcerting. Yet a new order took shape, an uneasy balance between Targaryen authority, enforced by the unstoppable might of the Dothraki, and the fractious lords of Westeros. News of the city's fall triggered chain reactions across the realm. Some houses bent the knee rather than face the same fate, while others prepared for rebellion, believing that eventually the Dothraki would falter or that winter would starve them out. But in that moment, Daenerys stood supreme in the capital. Still, conquest was only the beginning. Holding the realm was another matter entirely. The Dothraki were restless, ill-suited to remain cooped up in a city. They wanted to roam, raid, and fight. Daenerys tried to integrate them into the fabric of Westerosi life, but it was like trying to tame a swarm of hornets. She sent blood riders to pacify rebellious lords who refused her. She sent emissaries to the north, offering them autonomy if they recognized her as queen. She reached out to the Vale, hoping to secure alliances through marriage or gold. Khal Drogo, for his part, saw no reason not to keep fighting. He relished the idea of taking the entire continent in a storm of hooves, but Daenerys needed the realm to stand behind her, not lie in eternal ruin. Over time, the realm underwent shifts that no one could have predicted. Many small folk viewed the Targaryen queen as a lesser evil compared to lords who raised taxes and conscripted them into endless wars. The Dothraki, for all their savagery, were at least straightforward in their demands. Some found ways to trade with them, providing goods in exchange for gold or horses. The rapacity of the initial invasion gave way to a rough stability, albeit one rife with tension. Even in King's Landing, certain wards became de facto Dothraki quarters, where outsiders seldom ventured without cause. Daenerys clung to her dream of unity, hoping to restore the Seven Kingdoms under her banner. Yet she sensed the undertow of resentment, the old nobility conspiring in secret, the threat of a northern invasion once winter truly came. She worried that the Dothraki would never adapt to the concept of a stable monarchy. Khal Drogo, for his part, was content as long as he was free to hunt and fight whenever he pleased, so long as the spoils continued to flow. They were victorious, but that victory contained the seeds of new conflicts that could tear Westeros apart. Still, for that fleeting season after the fall of King's Landing, the Targaryen banners once again flew over the Red Keep. Daenerys, seated upon the Iron Throne, gazed over her court. A motley assemblage of Dothraki warriors, Westerosi knights who bent the knee, courtiers seeking favor, and foreign emissaries from Essos who wondered if trade might flourish under the new regime. Khal Drogo stood at her side, a living symbol of her conquest. They had done what no one believed possible, brought the Dothraki to Westeros in force and crushed the power of the Iron Throne. Their names spread across the realm, whispered in awe and dread, and in that moment, they believed they had changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms forever. Yet even as Daenerys felt the cold metal of the throne press against her back, she understood that holding this realm together would be an entirely different battle, one with no end in sight. For the hearts of men cannot be taken with mere steel and flame. They must be won through the slow forging of trust, custom, and order. She remembered the hiss of her brother's voice, the oath that the dragon must have its due. She remembered the worshipful gaze of the Dothraki when they called her the mother of stallions, the unburnt. Perhaps, she thought, the next step was to bring a new age to Westeros, one that honored both the old ways of the Horse Lords and the traditions of her ancestors who once united the realm under Dragonfire. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, she claimed the seat she believed was her birthright, with Khal Drogo's hand resting protectively on her shoulder, his dark eyes fierce with pride. The hooves of the Dothraki had thundered across the world, and now they shook the very foundations of the Seven Kingdoms. Far in the north, the Stark Lords contemplated this new reality. Some rumored that dark omens brewed beyond the wall, and that in time all men, Dothraki and Westerosi alike, would have to stand together against forces far more deadly than a foreign invasion. But for now, the realm's fate lay in the hands of Daenerys Targaryen, rightful queen by blood, and Khal Drogo, victor by conquest. If the realm would ever know peace, it would require a delicate balance of power and benevolence, one that even the greatest lords might struggle to achieve. But no one could say the realm was unaltered. The Dothraki now galloped through streets built by the hands of kings. Smoke rose from the fields that once fed thousands. And on the horizon, storms gathered, waiting to test the fragile new order. The Song of Ice and Fire had found a new verse, written in the blood of those who dared defy the stallion who mounts the world. In the days that followed, the shockwaves of the conquest spread to every corner of Westeros. The lords who had lost armies or seen their domains ravaged pondered how to respond to this new Targaryen monarchy. Ambassadors from the free cities quietly arrived, hoping to establish trade agreements that might secure profit under this new regime. Some recognized that the Dothraki had limited experience with governance. Perhaps they could be manipulated. Others, especially those from Volantis or Pentos, came armed with flattery and gifts, seeking to curry favor with the new queen who had proven her ferocity. Within the capital, the Gold Cloaks took new orders from Daenerys, though she sensed their loyalty was never assured. She allowed some Dothraki to patrol the streets, which caused friction with the local populace. Clashes erupted, and tensions ran high. Yet she knew she had to maintain a presence to demonstrate her authority. She named men of Westerosi birth who had pledged their swords to her as wardens over certain quarters, trying to create a sense of normalcy amid the chaos of occupation. Murmurs spread among the small folk. Some saw her as a liberator, a break from the prior king's corruption or cruelty. Others saw her as an invader, no better than any other warlord. Rumor had it that child beggars scurried through the ruined neighborhoods, telling stories of silver-haired queens and bronze-skinned riders who had spilled blood in the throne room.